Good morning, everyone, or good evening to wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another historian's interview on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and welcome to what is now the fourth episode for the month of December. Now, my guest today is a PhD in human sciences from Toulouse Capitole University. I'm probably going to butcher this, everyone, so I apologize in advance. He is passionate about history and strategy and well versed in research methods. He's currently director of a Doctorate of Business Administration program, and he has been conducting research in the historical field for over 15 years. He is an author of several historical works on the 17th century, French armies of 30 Years' War, La Bataille de Avins, 1635, and La Bataille de Rocroi. Again, I'm probably butchering that. I apologize. And he's also the author of the book Les Soldats, Lagide de Ptolémée, Les Sôter à Cléopâtre. Again, I'm butchering that very badly again. And numerous articles in French magazines. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, historian, Mr. Stephane Thion. Stephane, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
You are welcome. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. So, before we dive into your background in history as well as your research, is there anything else you would like to share with our viewers and listeners?
Okay, well, uh, firstly, sorry for my English because I hope it will be okay, but I'm not really fluent English speaking, but I think it will work. So, uh, at the beginning, in fact, I come from the business world. I was a head of marketing in a French company, French telecom provider. And something like I will say more than 15 years ago, I decided to it was a long run project to create, to become an entrepreneurship and to create my own company, a publishing company in military history, uh, because I want to, compared to sales phones and so on, that's one part of your life. It didn't means
Mm,
nothing, don't means nothing. So I want to create something, and I was from the school fond of history. I was making research for myself. I'm also a player of strategy games, historical strategy games, war games, and war games with Venice. So from a long time, I was fond of history, and so I created this publishing company. The problem being that at the beginning, when you order some works to author, well, it it means it needs some time.
mm,
And as at this time I was already writing and making some research. Well, I decided to launch as a first book for my publishing company a work what I was currently working on, and well, it was on the 17th century in France, in Europe, sorry, but also because it was, how can I say, a gap in
mm,
the publishing knowledge that we can find in France. We can find in France. That is to say, at this time, nobody really published about the 30 Years' War in France, and of course, consequently, about French armies. So it's something that, how can I say? We say in France un concours de circonstances, and I will translate it. It was a circumstance contest, circumstantial competition. And so I began to write books and history books because it was what my, of course, my how can I say, field of interest.
Nice.
So this publishing company, because of the subprime crisis, because there was a huge crisis of publishing in Europe in the end of the first decade of this century, between 2007 and 2010. So I shut this company, and I go on in my job doing achieving a PhD and going back to teaching, and teaching more in marketing and strategy. So at the beginning, nothing at the beginning should have led me to write books.
Fascinating. Well, thank you for sharing that. That actually is really intriguing. So let's dive a little bit more into your background. So, Stephane, would you say that you've always had an inkling of history, or did that passion come about later in your adult life?
In fact, there is something like a trigger. In France, we have the baccalaureate, which is I don't have exactly the level in United States, but at the undergraduate level.
Ah, okay.
And I had at this time a very, very good grade in history. There is a reason, because I like at this time, there is two things at this time. So I was something like 18 years old. I used to like history. And the second thing, it is I think the only really fantasy book I read now. The second one, I admire a lot Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is, because this work, which is really, it was a discover fascinating me. Well, it was really deep anchor in history, all the work of the building of Middle Earth. And I was also on my side very fond of history, Dark Age, and so on. So there is this trigger at the beginning that I began to write for me, to make research, to learn, or also I told you that I was a strategy games player.
Right.
So when I interest in a period, usually I make research on this period. I used to make research on this period, Dark Age, Napoleonic era, and so on. So it was at the beginning, there is some predisposition, we will say in French. Let me see if it is a good word. The right word. Yes, predisposition requirements. Well, predisposition, I think is a better. So, and then I managed to, when you build yourself, when you build your competencies, your skills,
Right.
you begin to build a brick, then another time another brick, and so on. And what time? It was a moment. So I began to as I say, to write in 2007, 2008, when I began to this publishing company. And then, I must say that my first book met some success. I published at this time in English and in French, so not only in France, but in the UK and in the United States. Because there is a few words, perhaps we will go back on this topic, which was French armies of the 30 years war. And so it was the beginning of the story.
Nice. And actually, that leads perfectly into the follow-up question. So I think you may have already touched on this, like, the trigger for, for passions of history. But when would you say in your adult life was the aha moment when you wanted to write about history and publish it to build your, to use a better word, brand as an historian, to showcase your research skills, but also your skills as an historian?
Well, This haha moment was when I begin with, you know, there is two stories. My stories as a publisher and as an author. And at the beginning, it was a publisher story, and quickly, because it was needed, I begin to write. So it was nevertheless this moment, because yes, it was clear that it was a moment. So I did it. It was not. I'm not sure I was ready at this time, because I did not. I was still in this domain, a self-made man. I didn't at this time. I don't have any PhD, so I don't have the method. So it was a first book, which was a discover, which met his audience in France and in the world, and it was a beginning. So it was, I think, yes, the beginning of this haha moment, as you said.
Nice.
After, do you have the question regarding is there a Stéphane branding or something like that? It is, you know, I think all is matter more on evolution better than revolution. So things are built step by step, and I think even if I have good feedbacks on my first book, when you are author, you are never satisfied of previous work, but it was not the moment where I think I had all the necessary skills, so bricks, in order to really do a good work. Well, the work as I see it, and it came more recently, this moment. I must say I stopped to my company in 2014. I go on publishing on papers, a magazine in France, but I stopped to write, because at this time I was following a PhD, and then I have to do research on strategy or marketing, but not in the business world. And I must say that perhaps 3 years ago, Heloin and company, I have an occasion to meet them, to have a discussion, and they asked me to publish new works, but also old books.
Nice.
And so at this time, I begin to rewrite in a more scientific, academic way all my books. So I improve them, and now I think there is perhaps this second moment, as you said. So where I think it is more the moment. So for 3 or 4 years, because I think there is a kind of maturity, but also, is it really branding?
I guess, like, maybe not branding's like the best word, but I would definitely say, like, you know, that's the books, like, you know, that started your that showcased your work as an historian, because, you know, for all of us historians, we all have like our knowledge that we learned in, you know, academic settings, and sometimes not many of us can go back into the field, so we feel like we're in this limbo where we're not getting a chance to showcase our work. But in this case, you know, at least for like in the writing sense, as like an author, we're able to showcase our expertise, our knowledge, and our skill through our writing. And that actually leads perfectly now into the next question, which is now going to be about the creation of your book, The French Armies of the 30 Years' War. So let's start with the first question. So when you began writing and researching the information for that time period and that topic, did you have any goals laid out, not just for the creation of the book, but personal goals you had as the author and the historian?
The first call was, well, at this time I was at the same time a publisher and author, and I used to work in a business world. So there is a preoccupation of rational, that is to say, writing a book that answer a need or that fill a gap. There was in this period a gap, so there is a need of knowledge on some countries on the 30 Years' War compared to, for instance, Second World War, Napoleonic eras, or Dark Age. There is a few books on this era, so there is, well, addressing a need of a possible need or segment.
Right.
But at the same time, also I was very, very interested in this period because there is a few knowledge, and I love to dig deep in a knowledge where we don't have a. I like to go to first material, not secondary source. So, and there is huge quantity of primary source that won't have been used. And of course, this period is, well, in France, because of the Three Musketeers, because of Richelieu, because of there is a lot of Cyrano de Bergerac. It is a period which is really, how can I say that, represents something, a bright era, something
Okay.
So I think it is a meeting of both, something, a gap, and a very interesting, a personal interest that leads to this first book. And I must say, this kind of specialization of this era, even if from this moment, from now, from my first book, I began to write on other periods.
Very nice. And just as a little overview, a little tangent, for our viewers and readers who may not be familiar with this time period in European history, Stéphane, can you give us a brief overview of the 30 Years' War from your research?
A brief overview of, sorry?
Of the 30 Years' War.
Okay, so the 30 Years' War, in fact, it is a war what is very well known because it had a huge impact on Germany, Central Europe. At the beginning, it began in Holy German Empire. Sorry, it was a religious war, but it was not in France. It begins in 1618, and a few years later, there was a first huge battle between Protestant and Catholic at the White Mountain. And from this time, France have its own problem with its own. In France, at the same time, there is some religious wars, but inside France, between Protestant, which we call Huguenots in France, and Catholics. But we were not in this real. It was not a real war with foreign interest, and so this war began in Germany. And because at the beginning, following a lot of victories from Catholic generals, the generals of the Catholic leagues, whose name was T. He won a lot of victories, and so Protestants have been weakened, but other countries around, well, Protestant states in Germany begin to call help from other countries. Netherlands, who was Protestant, and quickly Danish, as King Christian IV of Denmark, follow and send some go himself, lead an army in Germany. He met some defeats. He had something like three battle which he lost, and then there is a new period that's open around 1629, 1630, because the king, Gustave Adolphe, who is well known in the world, take the light, take for him the Protestant cause, and so he began his campaign with some victories like Bittenfeld, who was a very good, well-known victory, and Lutzen, who was a stalemate of victory, but he met his death at this moment. And so it was in 1632. 1632, death of Gustave Adolphe, but the Swedish, with the Chancellor of Saint-Tiana, tried to go on in this fight. So the best generals of Swedish generals continued to fight for the Protestant cause in Germany. But in 1634, they met a huge defeat in front of Spanish and Catholic, German Catholic troops. And so there was no more at this time a leader on the Protestant side. And in 1635, France enters the wars. The question is very interesting because France was not a Protestant state. Before, Richelieu and Louis XIV, reduce a revolt of the Protestants, but this period begin with something, a war that become more politic, because the problem of France, the greatest adversary, opponent of France was Spain.
Right.
Spain, because Spain at this time have a lot of power, and Spain was in Italy, Spain was in East France, Spain was in Netherlands, and so France, with through his minister Richelieu, begin to fear to be circled by Spain.
Okay.
So were surrounded by Spain. So politically, he said he think, well, it's not a good thing that Protestant states are so weak. We need to be protected. We need not be encircled. And so in 1635, France entered this war. So it was a very, and this war go on, but finish in 1648 with the victory of the alliance between France, Sweden, and Netherlands against the Holy German Empire and Spain. Sorry. So it was a very complex situation, political situation. It was a complex war. It was a long war, 30 years old, 30 years. So it was, and it's very interesting, and it was a very, very, how can I say, powerful, terrible war, because I think in these 30 years, something like half of Germany population met death. So it was a huge, in European history, it was a very, very hard period.
Wow. And I think I remember one documentary that I remember seeing in my undergraduate class in history, which was about the Battle of Haarlem in the Netherlands, which, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, was during the 30 Years' War. Because at this time, I believe, and again, I could be wrong with this statement, Spain was still like the dominant military force in Europe. I mean, yes, you had France, which was next to its neighbor, like one of the oldest European countries. But militarily speaking, Spain had the Armada, the famous Spanish Armada. Their military land army was very superior. And it's just very fascinating, like as you said, Stephane, like how very integral the 30 Years' War is to the formation of modern Europe and European history, and the creation of the Orange State, the Netherlands, and all of that. came into place. So I would imagine, researching all of this for your book was very, very fascinating, and maybe have change your perspective on some aspects of history, in the sense that they may have shed light on a topic that you did not know about or broken a myth. And that's the thing I love about history. And I'm wondering if that also was the same for readers who purchased your book. So when you published your book, The French Armies during this 30 Years War, what was the initial reaction? Was it positive, negative, or somewhere down the middle?
Well, first, before answering, the first question will be, well, from who was written this book. At this time, there is, well, I refer to a gap, so there is some knowledge, so historian can, but historian was not the primary target, because at this time, I feel I don't have all the skills, so there is other targets who were players, wargame players, strategy games player, wargame players who want to build an army and to find a lot of information material on the army they want to build. For people who also were only painting big figures and who are looking for what's a musketeer or a pikeman at this time looks like, in order to and there was also for reenactors. So at the beginning, it was the target was reenactors, strategic game players, painters.
Okay.
A target of people who were, well, who need this information for their hobby.
Okay.
Because there was a few material, it was also directed to people who are fond of history, but at this time, I was not, well, it was not, the book was not written with all the codes of scientific publishing, without lacking a reference, for instance, exactly a reference, and so on. So at the beginning, it was this target, and this book was really welcome. I have a lot of very good feedbacks, and even from people who were only interested on the period by history.
Okay.
It was not my primary target, but it seems to work, even if I felt that it was not perfect for this kind of audience.
Absolutely. I absolutely love that when guests say that they got more feedback from people outside of their target audience. And personally, I think, as an author and as an historian, when you have responses that are outside your target audience giving you like really good feedback, that really shows, okay, I've done something. I've now been able to show them my work, and now they're intrigued by it, and that is always a great feeling, because I definitely feel, and you may have some thoughts on this, Stefan, or comments on this, but I definitely feel now in the digital age, yes, historians are able to showcase their work to a much wider audience, but it's also a double-edged sword, because with the internet, with social media, you have what a lot of my colleagues have said, I'm either keyboard historians or armchair historians. And before I go any further, I do want to say that there are some very well talented uh, armchair historians who create amazing content on the internet to help the field of history. But even within that group of people, there are those who, you know, make these comments about research, books, and don't provide a lot of context to it. And for historians producing their first written work, there is that intimidation and anxiety of whether or not their work's going to be well received, They're going to be taken seriously, and the community that they're a part of is going to, support them. And it's very daunting and intimidating. And imposter syndrome comes into focus, especially when, let's say, a person produces their first work and it's a lot of, maybe not so far negative criticism, but it's very, very critical, sometimes overly critical, which can make the individual question themselves. So I'm curious, Stephane. So after you published your first book and later began writing other pieces in magazines, did you have that feeling of imposter syndrome? Or if not, what disciplined you to continue writing about history because you're passionate about it?
Well, I didn't have this kind of feeling, I mean the impostory feeling, because after I began a PhD, and at this time I go on. Well, I stopped writing books but perhaps yes, because one of my publisher, because some other French publisher begin to publish my book. For instance, the Battle of Rocroi. Rocroi, which is the more well-known battle in 30 Years' War, won by French, and so one of the more successful and well-known. It was published in a huge French publisher, but at this time, remember, something like in 2014, there is a 2011, 2014, there is a huge crisis for publishing company in Europe and in the world. And my publisher, I wasn't yet a publisher, also closed his collection. So I stopped to write book, but I go on writing for magazine. And at this time, I was running a PhD at the same time. So I began to really professionalize. And now, because this is 10 years ago, these last 10 years, I really become a very, I would say, professional about academic method, scientific method. What is interesting is that scientific method is quite the same for all the fields of research, from physical, medicine, marketing, strategy, history.
Right.
You will use some different inside the methodology. The methodology is the same. Inside this methodology, you will find some different method. You will have to be careful for some point, but usually you will have, for instance, the data collection, whatever the field, will be at the heart of the research. The data collection in history will be very different, but in marketing, when you only have to ask a question to people and so on. But we have all the same concern, which is avoiding bias, cognitive bias. There is a lot of cognitive bias in history, but you have also a lot of cognitive bias in marketing, in all human sciences. And I was there at this time, the teaching in every university in the world was really improving the teaching of methodology in human sciences with more and more technical method and so on. So at this time, I earned these skills. Now I am recognized with these skills. That I am a head of a Doctorate of Business Administration and so on, which the how can I say, the goal is really to improve some what we call analytical thinking, system thinking, which are skills based on methodology. So at this time, I really begin to write with this concern, and it changed a lot. And now, so I rewrite the French armies of the 30 Years' War for Heloin. I am finishing another book for them, which is also republishing, but I add this view, and I think now you ask for branding and for specificity is really the care, this concerned on avoiding each bias, on applying a method, good
Okay.
methodology, the more rigorously possible. So this is what I try to add, and how I try to differentiate myself. However, now even in history, they begin to learn a lot of other methods. You know, we speak a lot of interdisciplinary research,
Right.
to pick up methodology from other fields, and history that they also for 10 years they also try to do that. So the merging of methodology from history, human science, and other fields are more and more common.
Absolutely, 100%. And this actually now leads perfectly into what I like to call the business side of the interview, where I like to share with my guests or learn from my guests, how they approach, the business side of being an author and the business side of being an historian. So we'll start off with the first icebreaker question. So, Stephane, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, you were able to get in contact with Heloin in the UK, and after talking with them, you were able to publish with them. So, for you as an historian and as an author, what drew you to them and really made you think, okay, I like what they're doing, not just sense as like the author sense, but also as an historian in terms of like the types of books they're producing? Because I'm sure there are other publishing companies in Europe that do the same thing. But what about Heloin drew your sorry. But what was it about Heloin that said this is the right uh publishing company to work with?
Excellent question. When I was young, before I launched my publishing company, I was fond of an English publisher, which was not Heloin, because Heloin was small at this time. It was their big competitor, who was Osprey. And
I've heard of them.
Osprey's publishing also helped me to know. At this time, I think I was also I tried to take to have some connection with Osprey, and they proposed me to begin to work with them, but it was not the right moment for me, because it was after I began. It was in my PhD. I have a lot of other things to do, so it was not possible. But from this time, there is a challenger whose name is Heloin, who grow
Okay.
and grow, and in fact, they have something that. And even if both have qualities, they have something more than Osprey. It is they try to publish academic and most you see in Heloin book. It is really the academic way to publish to write. There is a kind of reference, there is a rigor. So they position themselves as academic publishing. So after it was it's often a matter of hazard. Of random, of chance. At this time, I had the occasion from author from Heloin, who put me in connection with who put me in touch with Heloin. So it was an opportunity, and it matched with them. And yes, it was at the moment that Heloin, I think, really takes the precedence and became more and more a reference in the domain of publishing books on really all the dimension of conflict, war, armies, soldiers, and so on. So there is a, there is a very interesting French philosopher, yes, or thinker, who write a book who compare he said the Western perspective of strategy and the Eastern perspective of strategy.
Mm.
When we speak about strategy, it can be personal strategy. That's why I'm referring to them. And this author says there is two ways, and it's not because it is Eastern or Western, but because theorician behind strategists are one is from Asia, from China, Sun Tzu, well known,
Mm-hmm.
and who theory and the well-known strategists who theorized the art of wars was Clausewitz in the West. And
Right.
these philosophers say they have two different perspectives, and this is very interesting of how can be your personal strategy. The Western strategy, who was theorized by Clausewitz, was when you want to go at a point, you have a target, an objective, you want to go there. You have to build a strategy with different, you take account of all your results, and you will make some stakes, some different objective on the sub-objectives, and you will try to go to the first, then the second, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the way I do it. I am more on the Chinese, who is, well, you have an objective. You know that you want to be published, for instance, by a company like Heloin.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't think of this objective. Only think of building your skills. Building these bricks, and perhaps at one moment there will be a moment, there will be an occasion, and you will be ready. I think that's what things happen for me. I was ready. They have a need, an occasion to meet, and it works.
Absolutely, 100%. And that is actually the same mindset a lot of my guests have said as well, where it's like focus on building your skills, building who you are, and then ultimately, as you said, an opportunity will arrive and you'll be ready to, as you said, meet that need. So now, speaking of meeting the needs, so when you began writing for Heloin, obviously going back to your first book, as you said, that you were writing for, reenactors, uh, fans of strategy war games, but now after honing your craft from that point and now working with Heloin, do you have a good idea or a better idea of who your audience is whenever you're writing another book on military history?
I don't have still the feedback and the results, but now consciously I write also for historians.
Okay.
I try to bring material for historians, and that's why one specificity of my books compared to other authors, I include a lot of quotation, because, well, I try to offer material. Why? Because of, well, I refer to cognitive bias. Every fact can be interpreted, and I try to let the smaller space for bad interpretation. So usually I produce a lot of text, and then I build on this text, but I propose a text. So in this way, I'm also giving material for other researchers who don't speak French, who don't have access to all these books written in old French. And of course, from this, I build my hypothesis. I built on this, but, well, I let open the all interpretation, and I give material in order for other authors, researchers, to build their own work, research work. So now I continue. I go on publishing for these hobbies, for people who have a hobby close to history. But now I began to publish more for researchers and so historians.
Excellent. And that actually leads perfectly now into the next question, which I'm very thankful a previous guest brought to my attention because it is something that's, very important. So originally this question, Stephane, it was mainly talking about, who are the historians who inspired you, who helped you hone your voice as an historian. And initially that was the main question, but a previous guest actually switched that on his head, and he also pertained it to authors as well, and saying that I could list all the authors who inspired me, but at the end of the day, I want people to know my works, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to showcase our individuality through our writings, and that's the same thing as historians. We could reference all the historians that we've researched, who we've admired, and so forth, but at the end of the day, we are showing our own research, our own individuality through our writing. So I'm wondering, Stephane, if that's been the same thing for you, this balancing act where, yes, you do want to show not just the sources, but also the historians who you've researched, who have helped you come to the conclusion in your writings, in your books. But also at the end of the day, you want to showcase, readers who are maybe history enthusiasts, reenactors, and fellow historians that exactly what you're talking about.
Okay. First, do I have some historian in reference? I have some. I don't have a name, well, a model. I like historian from the first half of the 20th century who wrote books, history books, sometimes with I was what we say parti pris.
Okay.
Yeah, well, with bias, because they don't have all the skills, but they begin to learn, and even if the result was not totally convincing, they tried. I have there is some, René Grousset is a French who wrote a lot on the Middle Age, Crusades, nomad steppe civilization, like Mongol, Scythian, and so on. And I like the work of this historian on the first half of the 20th, who begin to build. They followed the step of other in France at the end of the 19th century, who were really political. They want revenge against Germany, and they use history in order to build a national image or posture and so on. So there is this evolution, and they are not necessarily the best historian that I admire, but I really like the thing that knowledge in history progressively began more and more professionalized, and each actors in this chain is very interesting. So I have not necessarily a model. I want, there is other French authors like Ferdinand Lot in this. This is for the first question, and I think I lose the other part of the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So the second part of the question was, just to help with for this one. So you mentioned the historians who you've admired, in your own journey as an historian, but also how have you been able to showcase your individuality as an historian? Because at the end of the day, in our writings, it's all us. It's not someone else. We're not trying to be this person or that person. We're trying to show our readers, be it fellow historians, fellow history enthusiasts, or reenactors, that we know what we're talking about.
Not easy to answer. Even if in the first part of his interview I try to be rational, I mean, I'm not sure all is so rational. That is to say, it's difficult to say, what kind of showcase I would like to now. when you do research, you are looking for something, and you try to disseminate knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And now I am more and more a researcher than really. I mean, trying to really. Um, Sorry, with the time, it's more difficult to find my words in English.
No problem, Stephane. You're all good.
Um, well, I love to research. I love, and I think when I'm growing older, I'm not sure that out of thinking, well, this knowledge, I have it, I want to disseminate it, is the main thing.
Right.
Now, also, I'll try also to really, um, and I already refer to this, to try to showcase this methodology, to try to be really rigorous. And it's not easy. It's really not easy in our world. After, at the beginning, I can think, well, it was one of my distinctive skills was 17th century, but now I go on over period. But yes, there is a few who write on 17th century, so my name is traditionally linked with 17th century in France. Well, now I don't know if I really understand well your question, but perhaps not. This is my answer.
And that's okay. Yeah, it is kind of like I guess ultimately what I was trying to get at with is you know, in our own research, we in academia and in school, we are taught to write a certain way, present history in a certain way. But once we leave academia, we've always had, that's still same mindset, but we want to spread out and show people we can write history in a way that's a little bit different, where it is still academic and still research heavy, but it's not so much like textbook writing, in the sense that it's only going to be picked up by, fellow academics, but we can write history for people who are the enthusiasts, people who will go to like a mall or like a stand, who pick up a history magazine and they're able to understand the information and not get lost in the academic jargon. I guess that's ultimately what I was coming to, and seeing if you've been able to work on that, or create that with your own writing.
Well, I think, well, I stay now because of these skills. I am more academic, and I think one of my weakness is not where I don't have the heroic writing or something that
Okay.
this is something can be a way of improvement, but well, I really trust the academic approach, how you build knowledge, how you test, you create the knowledge, how from the inductive way, observing, collecting data, then analyzing them, then testing if your hypotheses are significant, and so on. I am really embedded in this methodology, so I think I have more. I am now more on this side, more academic, trying to sorry, I'm just finding.
No worries, Stephane.
To make accessible this knowledge, but not as some authors who have a really specific
Okay.
entertaining still.
Got it. That makes sense. And a lot of historians and a lot of authors in the history field have, they told me that they've found that, a little bit of a struggle, where, it's that training that we have from academia, because we're taught to write in this way. And sometimes some people are finding it easier to write in the more prose style of writing of history, where it's still informative, still academic, but not heavily academic. And sometimes it's not. And that just comes with, a lot of training, honing one's writing, and etc. And we're almost near the end of this amazing interview, Stefan. But there are a few last questions I do want to touch bases with you, and I'll give you probably the second to last one, because there's a lot of context to this one. So just brace yourselves. So I've been doing podcasting now for about almost 6 years. Interviewed a lot of authors, a lot of historians from various backgrounds, fields, viewpoints, etc. And I've enjoyed it every step of the way. I love meeting new people, learning from them, and just building my own, in a word, brand as an historian. And throughout these interviews, I've come to realize, just like authors, there are two roads for historians: to be an historian and to be known as an historian. To be an historian is one dedicated to the field of history, not motivated by capital, but let's face it, it's nice to get a little bit of money here and there. And the second one, to be known as an historian, is an individual dedicated to marketing, going on interviews such as these to showcase their work, to present their dissertation, going to a committee, etc. Now, both paths have their own hurdles and obstacles, but I definitely feel, especially for historians who are now out of university going into the workforce, that the second path is the most enticing, but it leads to a lot of problems, in that sense that it leads to unrealistic goals. If you try to make your passion your job, it's not going to work. And especially in the historian field, I don't know if it's the same in France, but here in the United States, if you don't have all the necessary skills for like a federal or government historian, you're going to be stuck in the rut. And ultimately, that can be deflating to a lot of first time historians. And another important thing to note is that in this field, as well as any field in the workforce, there is no guarantee that your first anything is going to skyrocket you to your goals or dreams. There are exceptions, of course, like in many fields. Some historians' dissertation can skyrocket them to a status where they're a consultant for a documentary or for a movie, and that's incredible. But generally speaking, that takes time, and you have this roller coaster for first time historians. And, you know, coming back to this question, it is very important to talk about it. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it is necessary. So I'm curious, Stefan, if you have any comments on, this discussion of, in the field of history, there is no guarantee one's first book, magazine article, publication, etc., is going to give them the gratification they are looking for, but it shouldn't stop them from pursuing history if that's something they're truly passionate about.
Yes, unfortunately, you are right. The same in France. It's very difficult to, well, there is some example of in the past. Now, trying to live being an historian who publishes work without another job aside, it's very, very complicated. So out of being, of course, an academic, so a researcher, being a professor in a university, so you can, it's the main way, but you already mentioned that. But out of this, well, I think it's very risky to begin a career to say I will be an historian and I will live with the owning of my books, because there is a lot of well, it will be a moment you don't know when it will happen.
Right.
So it's a very very tricky road, a very long journey, and so the best is having another objective, something that allow you to live. And keeping some time in some part of your life in order to write, and perhaps at one moment. Well, in fact, usually, and for my students and so on, I used to say, you have to learn to sow, and there will be a time for harvest. It will be perhaps, well, likely not in the year or the 2 years to come. You will have to be patient. And at what time, if you sow, it's the same for relationships. You have first to give to people before to receive. It's the same. So it's difficult to have an objective saying, I want to live, to be an historian, to publish, or even a writer of novel, without having something that comfort you and give you the time you need to try to give you the chance to meet this moment of perhaps all the stars will be aligned. It is a French expression, toutes les étoiles sont alignées, all the stars being aligned. And perhaps it will happen. So yes, it's a very, very difficult path, and there is an ingredient which is a chance, which is also happen. Not easy.
That is very true, especially here in the States. One guest said to me was that, the thing is, don't quit your day job because you need something to help sustain your living. And it is very true, Stephane. Unless you're going into like the academic setting to use your degree in history, or even working as a government historian, whether it's in the museums, as a researcher or archivist, generally speaking, you don't want to go outright into saying, I'm going to write books and I'm going to live off that, because, it's not very sustainable. Initially starting off, it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. And I know that, first and foremost, I've written 3 books, fiction books, but the mindset is still the same. Like, initially I thought I could live off the royalties of my books, but I'm not at that point yet where I can't. Everyone wants to be at that point, especially for historians, where their first book is like their moneymaker, that get rich quick thing. And that's another thing too to add in the field of history, especially for writing. It's not a get rich quick scheme. It's a lot of research. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of effort, because we've talked about research before, but it is true, because if you're writing a topic that's really good, generally speaking, someone else has written that topic before. They've covered all the bases. So now you have to think, what else haven't they explored? What are the sources not saying? So that takes a lot more time, and that's okay. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. It's honing one's craft. Because what I like to say is, grit transforms into talent, and we only get better as time goes on. And before we end this amazing interview, Stephane, here is the final question. And I don't think we touched on this, so I'm going to combine it with this one. Looking back on your life thus far, who would you like to give a personal shout out to, who have really stood by you, have helped you grow in your field, and just been like your anchors, so to speak? And with everything you've learned as a researcher, as a teacher, and as an author, what is your word of wisdom to fellow historians who want to go down the path of being a writer?
Okay, for the first part of the question, I don't know. I don't have a model or something. My life building, including as an author, is more sharing with a lot of other people. But I have not a guide. I had at the beginning, I want to become a publisher, an author, and so on. And then there is not one person. After, for the second part of the question, I think what is very interesting in history, in science, we used to know there is no truth. And what is very interesting, it is because I'm not teaching to academics. There is some academics in the DBA, but they are more businessmen. And the first thing I do, I tell them where they begin the program is, forgot all you know. Now you are Jon Snow, you know nothing. In this, and the academic field is trying to learning to behave in a world where there is no truth. One book I wrote was very interesting on the Battle of Rocroi, because when you want to analyze a battle, each actors, each testimonies, sorry,
no problem,
who each witnesser have one perspective of the battle. Even, for instance, at Rocroi in the French side, every generals are quarreling and not agree. So you won't have a true vision of what's happened. And that makes it really interesting. So the concept, I would say, you have to be really humble. And it's not because there is still a book who have been written, even a reference on the domain, but there is not a possibility because there is a lot of perspective for us. So it's very, very interesting. Out of learning method, trying to be sure, and I use also to say, well, when you are an academic, you ask a question, but don't ask a question for what you have already an answer. So it's and that's why this job is fantastic. You have to be very open to question, and it's open a lot of very interesting avenues. So I love this part of the work, and I have it for the business, but over domain, more publishing and strategy, and history for my real passion beside. I think it is an ambition before beginning the job that is worth to try. It helps. It learns you to become really at ease in a world that become more and more complicated, impracticable. We spoke of a VUCA world.
Right.
But this, when you do the job, when you do it, learning history, you become more and more at ease in instability. So there is a lot of very interesting consequences. So I think my answer go beyond your question, but it can be a good conclusion.
Yeah, that was actually a really good one. And I actually liked what you said of don't ask a question that you already know the answer, because it is true. Because if you know the answer to the question you're looking for, then you already know. It also reminds me of another thing an author said, which is, write something you're afraid of. And I think it can also be applied to historians, because, as historians, we all have our specialties that we like to work in, our comfort zones. For me, I like to work in classical antiquities. I have a friend who specializes in military history of African Americans in the United States. I have another who's a medievalist, but they all like to delve into other areas of history, even though they would not consider themselves specialists. And that's okay. That's completely fine. The history field is meant to be explored by everybody. Yes, we do have specialists for certain categories, but what's the point of history if we're not allowed to explore other avenues from people who are not in those fields but are willing to see something that others can't see? I mean, that is the beautiful thing that I love about history, and why I love doing these interviews, because I love meeting so many new people, learning from them, and getting new perspectives. Like, I never knew much about the 30 Years' War, but from what you told me, Stephane, it's a war that in Europe, it's very, very heavily researched, very well documented, and it's one of the many wars of the, pre-modern or gunpowder revolution wars that really shaped Europe. So absolutely write what you're afraid of or research what you're afraid of, because there's nothing stopping you. And I think with that, we will end it here. And I want to give a huge thank you, everyone, to our guest, Stephane, for coming on the show, telling us all about his research, his work as an historian, and the books he has been working on. And as he mentioned earlier, he's working on a second one. So I cannot wait to see what that entails. So, Stephane, thank you so much for coming on the show. And where can people find you on the internet to reach out, to talk with you, as well as purchase a copy of your books?
Good question. It's not. I have a LinkedIn account for the business, but I won't talk. Well, at one time, 10 years ago, I have a blog, and I used to publish a lot of first-hand material on this blog. But there is, I think, 7 years that I didn't actually. The name of the blog was a French de Rouen, de Rouen à Turenne, from Rouen to Turenne. Rouen,
okay.
it's a great French capital of this time, and Turenne, another one. But well, I don't use it. I have a Facebook account, but I publish nothing because I'm really now I give no truth on. I'm suspicious of Facebook and so on, so I don't really use it. It's only to have access to groups of history,
Right.
So it's not so easy. But I have a LinkedIn account and a Facebook account, which can be a way to try to connect with me.
Okay. And what of your books, especially the French armies during the 30 Years' War? Where can people go and purchase that?
Well, every bookshop that sell aliens books, but also there is a Alien and company have a website. It's more and more difficult to find this collection because they publish a lot. So bookshop who have all the collection, all the series. So the best way is to go to Alien company's website.
All right. I will link all that down
I don't know,
below.
perhaps the United States, there are perhaps some bookshop who are specialized, but 10 years ago, there is a lot of, in France, Europe, and I think also in the United States, a lot of specialized bookshop. I mean, bookshops specialized in history yes, closed. So I'm not sure that it's so easy out of on the net to find such books.
All right. Thank you for that, Stefan. I will link all those down below in the description of this video for you to go and check out. And again, I want to give a huge thank you to Stefan for coming on the show. And this won't be the last time you see him, viewers and listeners. As I mentioned in my previous interview with Reverend Dr. Stuart Jennings, I am looking for guests for my Historians Lounge season 3. So be on the lookout for Stefan for an episode in season 3 sometime next year. And I won't say what the topic is, but it may or may not have to do with the French armies of the 30 Years' War, but we'll just have to wait and see. So, Stefan, thank you again for coming on the show. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. It was a pleasure, Gabriel. Thank you.
Thank you. And as always, viewers and listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And stay tuned for future episodes coming out this week and next week. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world.